Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to go through my top 5 tips that I've learnt for Barra to help you guys catch more or bigger Barra this season. Let's get straight into it. Alright, so tip number 1. So in order to catch the big fish, we first have to figure out where they are. Our Barra are very predictable, as in where they can be in accordance to the tides. These tides will pretty much tell you where they're going to be and what they're going to be doing. So first off, I guess we start with the big tides. So the big tides, I'm from Townsville, so they can be anywhere. I normally count them about 2 meters plus, really, 2 to 3 meters. Yeah, about that. So anything about 2 meters plus, I'm probably going to be sticking to around the top of the creek. So I'll pop an image up now of where I would likely be fishing. These fish are lazy and they like to sit where the water is stagnant. In the creeks, the water is going to be gushing at this level. So in Mackay and that, I know you guys get like 6 meter tides, ridiculous tides. Here, more so for where I fish, and just from the stuff I've learnt this last year, the fish are going to be at the front of the creeks, out towards the flats and kind of up into like the mangroves and the headlands type areas, even into the rocks. These kind of tides, you want to get there before the water gets too high and into those really thick mangrove areas. So your second type of tide is kind of like a medium. It's kind of like a hybrid between, obviously it's medium, it's kind of a hybrid between small and your bigs. So I like to fish these on the bigger ends, same kind of fishing as your big tides, just out the front. I'm going to be fishing where it's nice and stagnant. You got spits, kind of just pressure points, and that's how I'm going to fish these fish on the medium tides. On the medium, at least most of the time in Townsville, you'll have your bigger and then you'll have your smaller secondary. You can fish these secondaries, but I find they're not as productive as going out the front on these bigger tides and just fishing the flats and finding fish out there. That's where they're going to eat. That's where they're going to be. And finally, you got your smaller tides. On these smaller tides, these fish are going to be hugging into the creeks. This is where you want to be up the creek. In those smaller tides, up to 1 meter. So in these tides, they're going to be hugging the bottom more so than anything. So in your snags and on like your corners of your creek where it gets really deep, you kind of really need a sounder. You don't absolutely need one. You can snag bash, but you're not going to be as productive, especially for catching the big fish. Alright, so moving on to part 2 is sounder skills. So I'm only going to have a quick run through of my settings and a quick run through of where you should use it and why. Not really going to get too in depth because it could be here for ages. I might think about making another video if this one does alright. So for my sounder settings, I'll run the highest kilohertz I can for my side scan. So in my case, it will be 1070 kilohertz. I'll run it at about 20 meters range either side. What's that, 60 feet? I'll run with my contrast high, my brightness low. So contrast is usually on about 86%, give or take, and my brightness a little bit lower, around 78 or so percent, depending on what the water's doing that day. And all I'll be doing with my side scan is driving along, looking for spots. So say laydowns, rock bars, snags, etc. I'll be looking for all those kinds of spots, and then I'll be looking for fish in those spots. I'll be looking for where the creek has been washed out or on the corners of the creek. All those kinds of areas, I'll be mainly going with my side scan, and I might not pick up a Barra 100% on the side scan each time, because sometimes they can look a bit funny, and that's where the down scan comes into play. So if I'm unsure, I'll go over with the down scan, and I will use same kind of settings, 1070 or my highest setting for my down scan, go over these fish, and it will give me a clear as day picture as to what's down there. I'll run 1070 and brightness and contrast about medium. You kind of don't really have to play with the down scan too much. So with your sounders, when do you use it? I like to mostly use it on the deeper tides, looking for schools of Barra in those snags, like the deeper snags on the corners of the creeks, and just in general fish holding areas like laydowns and rock bars type of thing, spits even. I don't usually use it as much for at the flats. And at the flats, you can kind of more just see with your eyes the pressure points. I'd rather go out in the flats on like a low tide and figure out the points I'll go on the fish. Google Maps is also great for that. But if you're getting a bit higher than, if you're getting more than a metre water on the flats, you can use your side scan. I'll just bump it out a bit. Another good tip for when to use your sounder is I really like to go find my spots in winter, as the Barra school up a lot more in winter and they're a lot harder to catch. So I tend to try and sacrifice a couple of days in winter and just go up a creek I don't know and find the spots where they all school up, because they usually return anyway, and then you can get onto them real good when the weather turns. But yeah, that's a great little tip. Alright, now that you've found the Barra, it's time for tip number 3, and that's what can entice them, what can make them bite. Because I've been sitting on Barra sometimes for up to 3, 4, 5 hours even, sitting on one big school of barramundi, just wondering, going through lures, wondering what I can do to make it work. And sometimes it just won't. I'll be honest, sometimes it just sucks, and it's very frustrating. But that one time it does pull off, it is, or work out, it is awesome. So what are the things that can affect it? So I run off a couple things. First one's going to be tide changes. My favourite is tide changes. So when it's coming into the low and coming into a high, that is my absolute favourite to wait on for. I reckon that's the best thing that amps them up, just that incoming. Second is I will actually set an alarm before I go for moon phases. If you don't know, we have 4 moon phases in the day. Just where the moon's directly above, directly below, and 2 minors where it's left and right of us. I'm sure everyone knows that, but I will set an alarm for when the moon phases are about to kick off, so I'm not accidentally searching for ground or anything, and I'll go to the spots that I've already found and try and target these fish on preferably the majors, but just something extra that helps. It doesn't always work, but when it does, you know, every little bit helps. And even your sounder can assist you in catching the fish that you've found. It will tell you where they are in the water column, so it might take some practice, but you know, if there's a certain amount of gap, you're gonna eventually figure out how far they are off at the bottom. Normally they're sitting about a metre, but it changes all the time. But if it's showing a metre at the bottom, you know, there's no point hopping it off the bottom each time. But that's pretty much all there is to enticing a bite. There's not too much that really goes into it. It's more time, and I'm going to show you something right now. This is what's helped me the most. Keeping a notepad. Keeping track of where you've failed and where you've gone right is the main contributor, I think, to my success. Alright, topic 4 is going to be lures. We're going to start off with the 4-inch Z-Man. These are great for starting out because they're cheap and easy to replace. Put a weedless hook on them, you can cast them right in the guts of the mangroves and everything. Nice to learn how to cast. And if you're just searching for ground, searching through snags, you can throw one of these in nicely. I like to let it sink. I usually run with a 1/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce head on the weedless. And I'll run these, I'll let it hit the bottom or close to, and just slowly retrieve. Alright, next we're going to have our prawn imitations. I really like to use these on another rod. Like I'll have that paddle tail on another rod and this on my second rod, usually on my spinner. And I'll run these on the deeper snags usually, and just hopping them nice and just over the top of the snag. You don't want to let these go too deep into them and start hopping, or you'll snag up. But I really like to use these in those deeper snags. You can see I've got an extra sinker on just to get a little bit extra depth. But I really like using these. You can see it's had a bit of a touch up in the creek. So you can't really use them again, but great. Barra love them. Alright, now we've got the tried and tested big paddle tail. This one's a Sicaria 7-inch. These are pretty golden. I really do like using them. Once again, on the neap tides, when they're all schooled up on the bottom is when I'll pull this out. You don't really want to pull it out for 1 or 2 fish because obviously expensive, and then you've got a lot of hooks to lose. But if I'm pulling up on a nice school, I have to make sure on my sounder that they're a nice school. I'll pull this out and I'll have a couple flicks at them. You can use this at a pressure point, so if you see a lot of Barra passing, you can pull this up mid-water column and drift it through the middle. Otherwise, if you see them on the bottom, you can obviously drop it to the bottom, or just before preferably, and then bring it across the top of their face. Because obviously their eyes are on the top of their head. They like to buff above them. That's why you hear the buffs in the water and everything. Alright, and lastly, I have hard bodies. Now, I tend to try and stay away from these because they're getting ridiculously expensive. I'm talking $30 a lure. However, I do love to use these in the shallows. On those big tides, generally this is the first thing I grab, and this is an X-Wrap 120mm. Generally the first thing I go to grab for, it requires no thought, cast like a missile. All you've got to do is cast up into the shallows where you think the Barra are, into those spits, into those mangroves. Obviously a bit conservative when it comes to tossing into the mangroves, but this is a magic lure. It's pretty much just below the water surface, and should get their attention. It's got a nice little rattle to it, just for the murkier waters. Great little lure. I'd definitely recommend a shallow diver like a Gold Bomber, X-Wrap, any kind of lure like that for the flats on those big tides. That's pretty much all I go to reach for. You can obviously rig a soft plastic up with like a 1/8 or something weight, 1/6, 1/8, but the problem with them is it just gets harder to cast is the problem, or you got to reel in fast with a heavier weight. The last lure I have still in the packet is Vibes. Generally like to run 110 to 130 when chasing Barra. Usually only use it when the snags there's not too many snags. You don't lose these things every second cast, but if you can get them in the open, like the barramundi in the open, these are a great option. They can't really resist it. Alright, now I'll talk about combos you can use. If I was going to say you could only have one rod, I would go with a 10 to 20 pound 7-foot bait cast rod. That would be my all-rounder, I think. If you could only have one, that's what I would go with. I have 3, and I'll go through in more depth later on why I have them and everything in another video possibly. But for now, I'll just do a quick run through. So here I have my spinner with a 4000 10 to 20 pound rod. I'll use this for my prawns and my Vibes. Stuff to bounce across the bottom, just because it's a little bit less taxing on the wrists with these kinds of lures, and they get down a little bit easier because you can just open the barrel. This is kind of my jack and smaller Barra setup. So yeah, it's an 8 to 14 pound, 6'8", with a Tertullian 200. Great setup for just targeting smaller species. As you can see, I've got a little paddle tail on it now. These paddle tails are great because they're very versatile, and you can change it to fish the flats or the deeper stuff at any moment. So it's nice and affordable and versatile. That's why I run them on these rods normally. And this rod I only just picked up recently, but this is my big Barra rod, so all my big paddle tails, big plastics, even the big prawns will go on this rod, just to try and pull them out of the structure, pull them away from the sharks, try and just get a bit more control over the bigger Barra when I've hooked one up. So, well, that's pretty much it for my tips, guys. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want to know, or send me a message. I'm happy to share my knowledge. I think the biggest teacher is time on the water. The more time you spend out there, the more you're going to figure out. And even if you've had a bad day, like I said, write it down in the notebook. You'll be able to, as long as you're learning something, that is the number one thing. If you keep repeating what you're doing with no change up at all, it's like the saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Barra fishing is the exact same thing, or any fishing is the exact same thing. You have to change it up. Hopefully this gives you a bit more pointers and what to look out for, and I hope you guys have a great Barra season and a great year. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe. Like I said before, leave a comment or send me a message if there's anything else you want to learn or know. Cheers.